Welcome to the Rise of China show, where you can discover how to benefit from the rise of China and learn Chinese efficiently at brainstormlanguages.com. This episode is the second part of the series of an interview with Mr. Edward Lemon, one of China's 30 hottest lawyers, and is a business partner of American ex-President George Bush's younger brother, Neil Bush. From his offices 800 meters from the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, Edward Lemon is going to be talking about setting up business in China, what you need to carefully consider so that it doesn't end in tears, the common business structure foreigners set up in China, wholly foreign-owned enterprise, also called a WOFE, intellectual property protection and licensing considerations, using offshore tax-free purpose vehicles to avoid tax, using a Hong Kong company entity to gain benefits, Chinese renminbi convertibility, how to get money out of China and avoid it being trapped there, exit strategies on how to structure your company so you can easily sell it, choosing the correct scope for your company, the advantages of the Shanghai Free Trade Zone for doing business. Can you explain the steps involved in setting up a business in China, the possible choices, timescales, and the costs involved?
There's all kinds of ways to set up here. So, I mean, we've got everything from, so-called publicly traded companies in China to, limited liability companies to joint ventures. And so there's a number of different vehicles. Just for everyone's boredom and edification, I mean, the Chinese law is essentially based on the German Code of 1896, or it's a continental legal system. And it's more, whereas you look at the common law, which is the United States, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, those are set up on a case law system where the law is created by cases, and they say this is what a company can and cannot do. I mean, they write laws and regulations, but it's interpreted by cases. So here you actually have to meet, kind of in a nice German style, you have to meet the preconditions to open up a company. So I'll talk about, I guess I can talk about a wide range of them, but let's talk about the most foreign companies setting up here and how they would do that. Is that what we want to talk about?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if someone was walking in the door today and said they wanted to open up a wholly foreign-owned enterprise, which is probably the most popular enterprise, the first thing, and again, this is, Stefan, with regards to your question, the first thing would be to say, have you protected your intellectual property rights? So before you launch, you have to know that question. Now, you're saying why? And I've filed it in the UK. I own it in the United States. I mean, all intellectual property is local. Just so everybody understands that. Here it's a first to file system. So that generally speaking, with some exceptions, the first person to file the intellectual property, the trademark. We'll talk about trademarks and logos and whatnot. They would own it. There's a presumption the filer is the owner. That may not be the case, but and then the second thing would be to take a look at domain names. Do you have whatever domain name you're using in your home country or the domain you want to use here? Make sure you have that. That's a very inexpensive exercise in the very beginning, rather than spend a great deal of time with it. Also, take a look at the Chinese trademark, and we had an Italian, very famous food company, which will remain nameless, but they were kind of chocolatiers, and they were in a wide range of food and upscale stuff that you give on big holidays. And they said, for goodness sakes, we're an Italian company, and we want to have our Italian name. We're not going to have a Chinese name. Well, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't explain to them that, under Chinese law, one must have a Chinese name, and it's a bit like the Miranda rights. If you don't choose one will be given for you, which is, colloquially, they have to talk about your company, your business, whatever it is, in Chinese. And an example of that is a kind of a famous one is Pfizer. So Pfizer had this product, and I'm sure people have heard of it, which is Viagra. Okay, so when that was launched, obviously a lot of gentlemen in this country were quite interested in what that product could do, and this is all in the press and publicly well known. So they went ahead, but the product, they were launching it in the United States, launching it in other jurisdictions. They filed the English language mark for Viagra, but they did not file the Chinese language mark, and so other enterprising people went ahead and did it, and they didn't yet have clinical studies done here, and the product wasn't approved for sale, and as a result, they had to wind up changing their this is a longer story, but the SFDA it's called the CFDA now. The China Food and Drug Administration, they actually disallowed the usage of the name, at least in pharmacological products and pharmaceutical products. So, long story short is Pfizer had more than enough intellectual property lawyers in their outfit, and then they have people here certainly on the ground, but they forgot to file for $350 or whatever the heck it is their Chinese trademark, which then ensued a great deal of money spent in legal fees and whatnot. So, number one, would take care of your intellectual property, the domains, if you have patents, if you have trademarks, if you have logos, go ahead and get them. First, do the search. Spend the money to do the search. Don't just throw. So that they would search the China Trademarks Office database. Same with SIPO, the database, and have a look at the State Intellectual Property Office, which governs patents. And then, second thing would be to consider whatever the company you're from is. So if it's, let's say, from the UK, and the UK business is involved in a number of things in the country, you might want to look to either use the UK company to set up this wholly foreign-owned enterprise. That's what it means. You're actually taking a corporation in another state, and another sovereign jurisdiction, and then or state or province, whatever the heck it is. But and then setting that enterprise up here to become a Chinese legal person. It's creating a limited liability company. So that would be one consideration. Probably the smarter alternative would be to set up an offshore tax-free special purpose vehicle. That's a big, long name, but there's a number of jurisdictions like Hong Kong, right? That's right, and BVI and a whole host of other tax-friendly jurisdictions that could be the company that you use as your vehicle. So, what the recommendation would be, you have the foreign company. They would actually set up a Hong Kong. We'll use it in this example, a special purpose tax-free vehicle. Hong Kong is the British legal system, and they have a number of different types of companies, but one of them is a non-taxable company. So if you're not resident there and you're not doing business in Hong Kong, then you can receive money and you can invoice from an address in Hong Kong, and that's considered to be non-taxable. Then one would take that Hong Kong enterprise, which is in essence it's a bunch of paper. It's been filed with the Hong Kong Companies Registry. You pay no money in. It's like opening up a company in any common law jurisdiction. No par values indicated. It's a closely held company. But and then you can leave it at your professional service provider's office in Hong Kong, and that's the address in which they can send information. But you can also use that address as an invoice, and it does under the tax inland revenue there. It does not constitute tax.
Wow.
Again, contact your tax advisor before in starting out. But I'm trying to make it. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. But then you take that paperwork and then you open up a wholly foreign-owned enterprise of that enterprise. And the reason we do that is we recommend that is essentially for one is an exit strategy. It's a bit like when you set up you get involved in a marriage or you do whatever, you got to say, hey, what's the exit strategy if this doesn't work out? So you can sell the Hong Kong company in a day, or the offshore tax-free special purpose company in a day, change the director, change the shareholder, and away you go. So it's either a positive thing if someone wants to buy your China-based business, they can buy that enterprise rather than buy the mainland enterprise. And if you want to run away and get out of it and make it a toxic asset. So the second thing, you want to ring fence your home company's liability. So you've actually got a step between the wholly foreign-owned enterprise and your home company. Third one would be for tax planning purposes. So you might like I said, the first part of this, the very first thing we talked about was protect your intellectual property rights. You can use it as a way of licensing. So your home company might actually own the intellectual property, then they're licensing it to the Hong Kong company and licensing it into the wholly foreign-owned enterprise. Mm-hmm. This is just a very vague example. And you can receive some kind of tax benefits with regards to that, depending on, again, your home jurisdiction otherwise. So when you set up a company in China, you have to declare what the registered capital is. And so it's different than and legally speaking, it's 30,000 RMB. It used to be that up until very recently that you had to actually pay that money in, and then you would receive you'd have to pay 15% roughly 15% the first 3 months, and then the remaining 85% over the course of 9 months, and that would be paid into in essence, a governmental bank account. They would check it off, and then they would say, or no, it would be paid into your bank account, but a government official would say, there it is. I'm talking about the company. And then you were in business. Now it's a declaration, and then of that, what that income would be. There's all kinds of thought processes on how to do that, which is, in America or in another jurisdiction. The reason why people set up corporations, I'll just get to the very basic thing, is that so if you're a business person, let's just say it was you and me as natural persons, and we set up our own we set up a company. It's so that there is liability, that the liability doesn't move on to us as individuals. They won't take away our shoes or our car or whatever the heck we got. It actually accrues to the company, so you keep the integrity of the company, and so you need someone to act as a director, a general manager, and a member of the board. That would be one human being. I'm talking about in China, and it could be one that's holding those 3 spots, or it could be a number of different people. And there's a question whether you want to have a board or you don't want to have a board of directors. This has been dicey. I think in the old days, people decided they wanted to be on the board, because it was kind of a vanity thing, but now there's legal liability that would stream to those folks if they don't follow Chinese laws, policies, and regulations, and it's made it difficult. Cost process of this, every range. You can find someone that's just, turning out the paperwork and can do it for a very, very inexpensive rate. And you can spend, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars doing it. Those are very extreme cases, but like I said, there's everything available. There are guys who are not lawyers. Just like you would have incorporators in other jurisdictions that know the local jurisdiction, know the local place, probably not great in English, probably not great at writing up your paperwork, but can get incorporated. There may be long-term ramifications with that, but like I said, one size doesn't fit all. You certainly don't, if you're just a startup and it's a lean-up startup situation, you probably don't want to,
spend too much money, yeah.
Exactly. So, there's every kind of range. Set up a Hong Kong company, again, there's a variation on what that ranges from, but that's a fixed cost, and it's relatively straight and set forward. I'd say depending on what it is you want and what services you want them to provide, but it could be, hundreds of dollars to a couple $1,000 or a little bit more, I guess, depending on what it is you want. The ones here, the only other thing I wanted to sort of point out when you do set up a company is that you have to get the scope of the business correct. So that's important. In a common law jurisdiction, when you set up, you can do any kind of business that doesn't need a license, doesn't need special approvals or license. Anything is considered not illegal. I've seen that even before. And so in China, there are things that are encouraged for investment. There are things that are restricted with investment, and there's things that are prohibited for investment. And so you've got to be mindful of that. So you have to get the proper business scope. And the problem with a number of key problems with using the real low service providers is the business scope. If your business scope isn't correct, then you're not able to conduct that kind of business, and that creates huge problems. And the other thing could be, we've had cases where you must have a business address, by the way, and the business address has to be licensed to be able to have an office there. And in one crazy instance, a big multinational actually came in. They said, "Hey, we already got a lease agreement. We're all ready to go." We did some research on it. It was zoned to be a toilet. Literally, it was a toilet. They built a huge building around it, but it wasn't licensed to hold a business. And so, long story short is, they had to eat the cost of that and go to a place that had a registered business. So you've got to have 30 square meters or 200 square meters, or you're doing manufacturing, it's got to be, a certain size that gets you past the giggle test, because the authorities will come out there and have a look. Mm-hmm. When you open up in Hong Kong, you can just put in your professional service provider's company. I don't know if that answers your question. I know that's a long-winded. We lawyers are long-winded, so that's...
No, there's a lot of good details there. There's a whole spectrum of circumstances I think people have to consider. But where about the time scales to set up business, particularly the foreign-owned enterprise? Yeah.
Yeah, the colloquial name is Woofy. That's
Woofy,
what it is. Dog. Yeah. It depends on the exact jurisdiction. What you want to do is you want to hope for the best. You want to prepare for the worst. Okay. People claim it can be done in a few weeks. I would say be ready for a 3-month process. And I'm not saying that this certainly wouldn't tout my services to the general public. What you want, I think, also with legal service providers or professional service providers is to give you a realistic timetable, and to kind of, if they're going to do any stabbing, it should be not from the back, but from the front. It isn't because the service providers are lazy. It's because there's a whole bunch of crazy small factors that I don't want to bore people with. But when you set up in the local group is the AIC, the Administration of Industry and Commerce. And when you set up there, for example, you've got to have a Chinese name. So you go into the district that you're in for the AIC, and then you may input your name, the Chinese name that you would like, but someone else may have that name. That's a business registration in that particular district. It doesn't mean that they own the trademark. It just means that they're sitting there. So if you waste a lot of time coming up with a whole bunch of different alternatives, because that name's already been used in Chinese in the corporate registry, then you'll keep going back, and that could be dragged out for quite a long time. We try to say, come up with 8 different names. It has nothing to do with your trademarks, but just let's get your business registered. Mm-hmm. Go there with 8 names. We're going through the computer with the people and ticking it off. That one works, that one doesn't work. And then we can move back and then change the Chinese name, the business name, because the granted trademark right or intellectual property right would trump the fact that their business registration is that way. And there was a very famous case going on here. It was in Qingdao, actually. It was Xinbake. They had some local company, which is Starbucks in Chinese, registered business name as Xinbake, and that was before the granted right from Starbucks came down. And once Starbucks was given the granted right, and this is the company from Seattle that was working through another company, but they were able to go to the AIC and say, please strike them from the company's registry from using that name. So the long story short is that there are certain things. So back at about 3 months, supposedly not supposedly, it's actually come to pass that they're rewriting the corporate laws, policies and regulations, and they're going to be implementing them over the course of 3 years. Could take them longer. So all this is open for change. And I think if folks want to do this, or if there's potential lawyers or lawyers looking at this, if you look at Chinese laws, policies, and regulations, and there's even applications with them, they're relatively briefly written, and that's where the beauty of it comes in, because there's a lot of room for
interpretation.
And local interpretation by local officials in local places. Nobody gets paid any more money for figuring out how to implement these things, and there's disconnect and confusion when that happens. And then just notification. There is something called Supreme Court interpretations, but that's not based on case law. It's just this is how you should do it, or this is the guideline for doing it. So that makes it more complex. But yeah, I would say bank on 3 months for that. There's certain places that are saying it's much faster. The Shanghai Free Trade Zone. There's a place in Guangdong, in Guangzhou or near Guangzhou that they just opened up, and they're saying it can be done for relatively inexpensive. A relatively short period of time, and therefore less expensive. But I think if you want to go in and do it, you want to speak to your professional service provider and try to have them meet your expectations.
Mm-hmm. I heard that, I don't know if it's true or not, but a businessman told me that if you don't set up a business in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, it'd be very hard to convert your profits from RMB and convert it into foreign currency.
Yeah, I understand that. So I think there's some convertibility in Hong Kong now, but that doesn't solve that businessman's problem. The fact is that one can, and once you have this business person's comment, when you have the business, you can actually have money come out, which can be converted and sent out as a dividend, but that can only be done on once a year basis. After you paid your taxes and you've done it. So you can actually do it. There is the difference between the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, and I've been out there to speak to them, and I know that's still being highly touted and pushed by the central government to be successful, and ultimately I think they will be. I think they're working out a lot of kinks with it. There is convertibility there. There are actually financial institutions that are located there. That is considered to be quote unquote offshore with regards to this transactions. It does raise problems though for folks who set up there, and when we've had instances and clients like this, there doesn't allow them to, because they're in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, it doesn't allow them to do, say, distribution within China that's considered to be outside of China, and then that's another red flag, which is if you're involved in business and then you want to find vendors or other types of things, make sure that they're able to legally do what they say they can do. And by that, you just get their business license and see what their scope is. If they say they're distributors, then they can do it. But yeah, convertibility is a huge question. What we do with regards to money issues is a lot of times intellectual property, and people don't look at it this way because, again, you go to an intellectual property practitioner, they don't know anything about tax, they don't know anything about convertibility of currency, but you can actually have a licensing agreement, say, from headquarters to the wholly foreknown of the woofie, and you could actually charge a fee, so it's actually a cost as opposed to taking out.
Okay.
Now you're going to pay taxes on that, but the money can move more freely. So what this goes to my point is, you can go to somebody and say, set up a company, but then what? You have to have a plan, and you have to have this thought out. How am I going to get money out of the country, and how am I going to function on a daily basis? And even as individuals, we're liable to pay individual income tax. We weren't up to a number of years ago. On the full spectrum, we have to pay welfare benefits as foreigners. This just came in a few years ago as well, and it may sound strange to people from other nations, but yeah, foreign people were not part of that equation, and what they charge us tax? It was kind of they've been touting the so-called driving or getting foreign folks to China and whatnot. And there's been certain regions that have, and a bit of that is a bit duplicitous in its title, because some of it is foreign talent, and some of those are overseas Chinese who've actually gone and gotten residency or nationality in other countries. So that it might be some people. The message is a bit mixed. What's happened in my mind, from my perspective, is that the biggest provider of tax, historically, at least since I've been here, is to this date, is the tobacco industry, and that's that's owned by the state tobacco monopoly, and they've got to really shift their tax base into individual income tax, into corporations paying taxes, and into foreign people that are resident here paying taxes. So that's why they instituted that. It does top off at a certain level. Paying welfare benefits, I'm not sure many of us will be taking our pensions here that are foreigners, but we do have to pay it. And even if you're a foreign expert, I mean, you still have to. There is a foreign experts bureau. I guess it's another kind of conversation. I'm actually a registered foreign expert at the Foreign Experts Bureau, and this sort of dates out of. I don't think anyone has to rush to be a foreign expert, but this dates out of the archaic history that I've had here, living in the country for a lot of years. But that might be something if people want to come over and teach or do whatever they do is to get registered at the Foreign Experts Bureau as an expert.
What main business issues and problems do you see foreigners facing in China?
I think the number one issue is that of human resources, and I think that again, it's getting the right people. We've got 1.3 billion here or more, whatever the number is, but to try to find qualified people that understand your message or understand your mission as a company is difficult to do. And so I see that it's even something as trivial as that, where you say, hey, we're producing cars, for goodness sakes, we're producing whatever, chemicals or drugs or pharmaceutical products. It's really about people. And I think building up the correct team can make all the difference in the world. And, I think that my countrymen, Americans, are probably the worst at this. I mean, we make friends we think we make friends very quickly. And there's a tendency, for people Americans, because we're a very large nation, we're kind of an island nation, and we're an immigration nation. We think we kind of know this. We got this whole foreign cultures and ideas down, even though we're not. So there's a tendency to sort of, select someone very quickly, and because they did X, Y, and Z together. Although I guess I don't know, observing this for a long time, I think Otto von Bismarck said there's two things you don't want to see made. I think it's sausage and law. I think I'd add the third one, which is the selection of some of these employees or management personnel of some of these companies in China. We've had over the years people literally walking off with chops, which is an instrument. It's a seal of a company, which is more powerful than a person's signature. And literally hijacking a company. You can't even go to the police and get another chop because they need a chop on the form to be able to say it's lost or it's stolen. So, and then we have a case right now where this is exactly the case. The person who's a local person is holding onto the chops, and then we go to the Administration of Industry and Commerce and we say it's lost, and then the guy comes forward and says, no, we're just having a business dispute. And then meanwhile, as you're administratively fighting about this and he's filing lawsuits, our side's filing lawsuits, the company is at a dead standstill. So number one thing I think is human resources. Number two, obviously, and this is thrown around a lot, is intellectual property issues. Make sure it's filed and it's granted. I mean, like I said, many people come in and say, well, we filed and we should be okay here, and you have to be vigilant with regards to that. And I guess the other thing is, we have a saying in the United States, I come from kind of corn country, that the corn always grows taller over the shadow of the farmer. I mean, you've got to be there and you've got to be hands-on. This idea that some operation is going to go blindly on automatic pilot is just not going to happen. There has to be also that, people or companies that wind up doing well here have a very clear idea of who they are, and they keep to that. I mean, the mistake I see, which would kind of almost become humorous, I guess tragedy plus time equals comedy, is people come in here and they just, going from Illinois to Iowa, they would never do these things, but going from Illinois to China, they just abandon all hope at the border and they just let common sense go, and they do things that we wouldn't normally do, or going from Illinois to the UK, and so these are huge classic blunders of hubris and getting lost in the culture and getting lost in a whole bunch of other things. I mean, I would encourage people to try to stay on their pathway and stay on what makes them good in their home country. And those are the people who and the companies that wind up doing well. They tweak it and give it Chinese characteristics, and obviously we've got different laws and regulations here. But the people who lose the message of who they are, it becomes extremely difficult. And like I said, I mean, to get that farmer to have the shadow over the corn to make it grow tall, I mean, a lot of times moving somebody from a foreign jurisdiction here is a very expensive process. It could be, at the end of the day, many, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars can be spent. Education for foreign kids is extremely expensive. It runs, depending on where you live, and I don't know, to 10 to 20 to 35,000 US dollars a year. When you're coming over here, it's not just the candidate, but it's the whole candidate's family that must be considered. And the other thing that they're really cracking down on, encouraging or not encouraging, we talked about that, foreigners to come here, is they've tightened up the visa regulations a lot. I mean, we've seen this happen before 2008, the Olympics, where they were, kind of getting things ready for the big show, and in the Beijing Olympics. And we're also seeing, there's economic issues here where they want to keep Chinese employed, and so it's not as easy as it was to get visas. And there's some real gaps in the visa law. So be mindful of that, and be mindful that if you overstay your visa, they will detain you, and it depends on how long it used to be just a fine. I mean, if you've gone way over the line by many months or years, we've seen that. They'll detain you and deport you. So, I mean, this is not kind of a laughing matter.
So how important do you think it is to develop relationships or 关系?
I'm delighted to have this question because I've got my own viewpoint on it, which has been developed over the years. I come from Chicago, and the equivalent of guanxi in our city was called clout. I mean, that was to be able to have connections to City Hall or connections to people. I mean, my advice to folks on that is that, it's good, but it cuts both ways. So that which brings you there can also wind up cutting your throat. The idea of someone being all-powerful with regards to connections, with regards to the whole country, is a complete misnomer, probably with the exception of a few people. The reason why we did what we did, or we got as far as we got, had to do with building up relationships. I think the goal of the Chinese now, and Xi Jinping and this anti-corruption drive, is really to try to reduce that. And so I think if as much as you can play it up the middle, have something that people want to really buy into, and I'm talking about with regards to your business, and the less that you have to do with that, you're probably better off. There are people in companies that have been here over the years, and certainly they wound up saying, hey, we've snagged this huge company and they're going to be doing this for us or that for us, and we've got the relationship with this guy with some kind of official. It's a bit like, it's good, but it's a bit like sleeping next to an elephant. I mean, it can be extremely dangerous. There's movement. Yeah. So, I don't really subscribe to the whole thing myself, and people can avoid that stuff. I mean, I think that's good. I see that. Maybe my perspective is I see it from a very dark perspective. Usually when things have gone terribly wrong, then it turns out this was the person who was the guanxi guy, the other thing is that, I'm not 100% sure that the people who have relationships or whatever, that you're spending your effort, in the right place.
If you want to get in touch with Mr. Lehman, his website is www.lehmanlaw.com. That's LEHMAN law.com. And his email is e.lehman@lemon.com. We want to grow our community to become a leading resource on how to help foreigners understand and benefit from the rise of China and the Chinese language. Join our mailing list on brainstormlanguages.com, and you can choose which type of info you want to be updated on. If you want to show our community your support, we'd love it if you'd subscribe to our show on iTunes or leave us a comment there. Thanks for listening to The Rise of China and How It Can Benefit You podcast at www.brainstormlanguages.com.